Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
With the holiday season in full swing, I had my eyes set on one thing. It was a sleek e-bike that I'd been saving up for. I was hoping to snag it during a Black Friday sale, but unfortunately, the shopping frenzy on that day left me empty-handed. The e-bikes sold out almost instantly, and I was left standing in the cold, both literally and figuratively. You see, my commute to work was long and tedious, and that e-bike promised to ease my daily routine significantly. I was disappointed, but I was also determined. So, where do I go? I turned to Craigslist because I was hoping to find a similar model. I needed something reliable, affordable, and soon. After a few hours of scrolling through the listings, one ad caught my attention. It was practically identical to the one that I had missed out on. It looked well-maintained and reasonably priced, and it was located not far from my place. The photo showed the bike in great condition, and the description was straightforward. So, excitedly, I sent a message to the seller, hoping that it wasn't already gone. The response came quickly. The owner, a man named John, was polite and seemed eager to sell it. He agreed to meet me the next day so that I could see the bike in person. I was relieved and definitely hopeful that this might be the solution that I was looking for. The following day, I took a bus to the neighborhood where John lived, and then I walked the remaining distance to his address. The street was quiet, lined with modest homes and scattering of leafless trees. John greeted me at the door, and he looked like he was in his late 20s, early 30s. He had unkempt brown hair and a tall build. He was wearing a green t-shirt, some jeans, and a cap. He led me to the garage where the e-bike stood, and I immediately felt a sense of relief. The bike was there, and just as described, it was clean and well kept. It was almost too good to be true. I cannot explain how happy I was. As I inspected the bike, I noticed that the battery level was low. John explained that it hadn't been charged in a while, but he assured me that it worked perfectly. I weighed my options, considering the long commute ahead of me. Despite the low battery, the bike was just too good to pass up. So I was confident in my choice. I sealed the deal and I paid John, and we completed the transaction. As we were wrapping up, he casually asked if I lived nearby. I told him no, but I assured him that it was fine since I now had the bike. His next offer took me by surprise though. He suggested giving me a ride home, mentioning that the e-bike wouldn't last the trip due to its low charge. I thanked him, but I declined the offer. The idea of accepting a ride from a stranger just didn't sit well with me. One of the reasons why I wanted to get a bike is that I am genuinely uncomfortable with getting into vehicles with strangers in it. Call me paranoid, but it is what it is. And yes, when I was on the bus that I mentioned, I was feeling uncomfortable the whole time. But John was so insistent. He pressed on, he tried to persuade me. An alarm bell rang in my mind, and my instincts told me that something was off. I politely but firmly declined again. I was trying to maintain my composure, even as a wave of unease washed over me. I turned to leave, pushing the bike along the sidewalk, and I could feel his eyes on my back. My heart rate quickened as I focused on getting to the main road. As I reached the end of the street, I heard the rumble of a car engine behind me. A glance over my shoulder confirmed my fears. John's car pulled out of his driveway and was slowly following me. I mean, what the hell? Is this guy serious? I felt a wave of regret inside me. I was now angry at myself Just because I wanted this bike, I put myself in this situation. I tightened my grip on the handlebars, and it was no longer just a sail gone sour. It felt like a pursuit. I stopped, I took a breath, and I turned to face the car. John rolled down the window, repeating his offer to drive me home. The pretense of friendliness was still there, but I didn't buy it. Every instinct inside me screamed that his intentions weren't as benign as he claimed. I stood my ground, and I told him firmly to leave me alone. I told him that if he doesn't, that I am going to call the police if he continued to follow me. My voice was steady, but inside, I was shaking. I actually felt like I was about to puke. The risk of confrontation felt real and present. I mean, this guy could run me over if he snaps. But to my relief, I think my warnings seemed to finally sink in. John looked like he hesitated, and then he slowly drove past me, his car disappearing around the corner. I waited for a moment, making sure that he wasn't coming back before continuing my journey home. As I rode the bike on the remaining battery charge, I just couldn't shake off what had happened to me. I was grateful that nothing worse had occurred, but the encounter left me messed up. I wondered what might have happened had he been more forceful, or if I hadn't been able to think of scaring him with the police. All I could say is that in the end, I was fortunate, but I'll always remember that day as a reminder to be vigilant and to trust that inner voice that warns when something is not right. So John, the creepy bike seller who wanted me to get into his car and then stalked me on the road when I said no, I hope you rot. I'm female, and when I was 19, I was looking for a room to rent in the city that I was moving to for college. It was about an hour away from my family, and I wasn't having much luck, and my mom started helping me to look for a place. She found an ad on Craigslist for a room for just $300 in a house, everything included. The homeowner was a man, and he rented the additional room upstairs to other women while he lived in the finished basement. The ad stated that he rarely ever saw the other roommates because he had a kitchen and his own entrance downstairs, and that he preferred women because he had issues with male roommates in the past, partying and causing damage. We decided to take a look since it was the cheapest that we could find in the area. My mom and I went to the house to view it. It was a decent house, decent neighborhood, and he opened the door and was very welcoming. He was middle-aged. The kitchen and the living room were furnished nicely and clean. My mom loves to talk and get to know people, so they were engaged in conversation while I stood there quietly and I observed the place. He then said that he would show me my room. We head towards the staircase to go up, as I thought, since he said on the phone that my room was upstairs with the other roommates. But then, he opens another door and we follow. He takes us down to the basement and opens a door to a very small room. There was no closet and no windows. He then proceeds to say that this is my room and that I will be sharing the bathroom in the hallway with him, and his bedroom did not have a door on it. I was definitely thinking, absolutely not. This is weird. But then, they were so deep in conversation that I couldn't interject. He then leads us upstairs and then shows us the other rooms, which the doors were open, and says that they were currently rented. He then starts telling us elaborate stories about the other women, not very nice stories describing drinking problems. My mom was listening intently, but I took the time to investigate further. I looked in all 3 rooms and the bathrooms. There was furniture, but not a single item in there that looked like it belonged to a woman. No clothes or anything. only men's clothes in one of the closets. He had no problem with me creeping around his tenants' rooms without their permission. I then heard him tell my mom that he has some of his stuff in their closets, but that they don't mind it. And in my head, I'm just like, why the hell would a tenant pay you for you to use their space as storage? I was feeling really uncomfortable, and I started moving them back downstairs as they talk. My mom had mentioned when we arrived that her and my dad were going on a vacation the next week, but I couldn't go because I had to work. He brought it up again and that I should come by the next week and have dinner with him and the roomies to see if we would all get along. I said sure, and then we left. And as soon as we got in the car, I told my mom that I would definitely not be living there. She was dumbfounded. I had to explain to her that not only did he lie about the room that I would be in, that I was not supposed to be in the basement with him, as well as share a bathroom with him, and he didn't even have a damn door. But also, did she not notice how no one else lived there? She still didn't get it though, and thought that I was just being paranoid and thought that he was nice and it was a cheap deal. I had to explain it to my stepdad and get him to tell her that by no means would I be living there. I tried to report the post, but by the time that we got home, he removed it. I think he planned on murdering me at dinner or abducting me and holding me hostage in that basement room that had no way to escape. I hope that guy hits a tree with his car one day. Edit. Some details have been coming back to me since I have been answering all of your questions. This happened in 2011, so it's been quite a while. When he took us upstairs, there was a wide landing that was surrounded by the rooms. As soon as we got up there, he motions towards one of the rooms and started this long, intricate story about the woman who lived in there and talking about her alcoholism and a crazy ex. He was very exaggerated in how he talked with a lot of gestures. My mom stood there just listening to him. I don't know if it was sheer distraction or she just didn't want to be rude. But either way, I don't recall her ever having a good look around those rooms. I went and I looked. All the doors were open. They had neatly made beds with dark wood bed frames, bureaus with mirrors and nightstands. There were sliding mirror closets, and they were empty, except for one that had men's clothes hanging, pushed against one corner. Nothing was on the nightstands other than the lamp. I went into the bathrooms and there was nothing on the vanity in them other than some hand soap. I looked in the showers too, but nothing other than bar soap. The bedroom on the left had an empty suitcase laying open in the middle of the bed. This was one of the rooms with the empty closet. And after seeing all of this, I came back onto the landing and started slowly heading down the stairs. They were still talking and absent-mindedly followed me down to the living room. That's when he mentioned dinner, and then we left shortly after. I think that's why my mom didn't notice a lot and didn't believe me at first. She didn't take more than a quick glance upstairs, and when we were in the basement, he was just as talkative. A commenter on here who works with law enforcement pointed out that this was probably a sex trafficking situation. The bedroom in the basement is where a victim is kept, drugged and abused until broken and then trafficked. I honestly think that this is more plausible with the situation, as well as my city is actually a hotspot for that. I am so grateful that we got out of there, and I hope that my experience could help someone one day notice the details and get out of the situation safely. And I hope everyone stays safe and blessed. My name is Crystal and I'm female, and this experience taught me the thin line between trust and danger that can exist in the guise of an innocent transaction. A year ago, I was selling a laptop on Craigslist. It was a high-end model that I no longer needed. I was hoping to get a decent amount to cover some bills, and I had listed it with all the specs, included pictures, and set what I thought was a reasonable price. Almost immediately, I received emails from several interested buyers, but one stood out, a man named Anderson. His emails were articulate, unlike some of the poorly written messages that usually flood in. He seemed genuinely interested, and he asked thoughtful questions about the laptop's history and also its condition. After a bit of correspondence, he expressed his desire to buy it and then suggested that we meet to complete the sale. I proposed meeting at a local coffee shop, a public place where the exchange could occur safely and have witnesses around. Anderson agreed, but on the morning of, he sent an email asking if we could move the meeting to a different location. He mentioned having a last-minute schedule change and then suggested a park that wasn't far from the coffee shop. It was a busy area. It was frequented by joggers and dog walkers, so I didn't think twice about the request. Upon arriving to the park, I found a bench near the entrance and I settled in to wait. I had brought the laptop, neatly packed in its original box, ready for inspection. Anderson emailed me again, apologizing for the delay and asking if I could move to a different part of the park, closer to the wooded area. He was claiming that he struggled to find parking nearby. Again, I obliged, although I felt a slight twinge of unease at the request. I walked towards the area that he had specified, noting that it was less populated than where I'd initially been waiting. There were still people around, but they were dispersed, and the atmosphere felt quieter, almost isolated. I found a new bench and I sat down, checking my phone for any new messages. Anderson emailed me once more, apologizing profusely and explaining that he was running later than expected. He asked if I would be able to meet him at a nearby parking lot instead, promising to be there shortly. But by then, my patience was wearing thin. But I rationalized that it was a public location and I needed the sale. The parking lot was adjacent to the park, separated by a line of trees. It wasn't far, but as I walked over, the earlier feeling of unease returned to me. It wasn't a completely deserted area, but the atmosphere was different. It was quiet, with only a few scattered cars and less foot traffic. I stood by the entrance holding the laptop box, and I was scanning the area for anyone who might be Anderson. I felt more exposed than I had in the park, the expansive lot offering little in the way of cover or comfort. It was then that I noticed a car that was parked a little distance away and its engine idling. The windows were tinted and I couldn't see inside. I waited, hoping Anderson would emerge, but instead, the car remained stationary, its presence growing more ominous by the minute. And then, another email arrived, this time asking me to approach the car as he was just finishing up a call. Now, alarm bells were ringing in my head. The whole situation just felt wrong, and I finally paid attention to the instincts that had been whispering their warnings all along. I replied, saying that I would prefer to meet outside the car, making up an excuse to avoid getting too close. Minutes passed. There was no response. The car continued to idle, its driver hidden behind the tinted glass. I felt the situation deteriorating rapidly. I decided then and there that it wasn't worth the risk. I turned on my heel and I walked back towards the park, trying to maintain a calm composure while fighting the urge to sprint. As I reached the park's edge, I glanced back to see the car pulling out of the parking spot slowly. It didn't follow me, but its departure seemed to confirm that something had been amiss. I just made my way back to the original meeting place, relieved to see the familiar bustle of the coffee shop. My phone buzzed once more with an email from Anderson, again apologizing and asking if we could reschedule. I ignored it. I was just grateful that I had listened to my gut before the circumstances had escalated. Reflecting on it all, I realized how easily I had allowed myself to be maneuvered into increasingly vulnerable situations. The seemingly innocuous emails and plausible reasons had led me step by step to a place where I was isolated and at risk. I was just lucky to have recognized the danger in time. I reported the incident to Craigslist, and I provided all the details and emails. But I have never heard back from Anderson. It was as if he vanished altogether. So, if you've gotten to this part, I appreciate you for reading all of it. Remember, stay safe. And Anderson, whoever you are or wherever you are, let's not meet. Hello everyone. I'm 33 and male, and I am running a small side business selling anime merchandise on Craigslist. It had always been a relatively easy and enjoyable hobby for me. I had amassed quite a collection over the years, and occasionally I sold items to fellow fans who were as passionate about the genre as I was. It was a very straightforward process. I post an ad, exchange a few messages, I arranged the pickup, and that was usually the end of it. One day, I received a message from a potential buyer who was interested in a specific figurine of Barbara. For those who don't know, Barbara is a character from the popular game Genshin Impact. The request seemed typical, and after a brief exchange, we agreed on a meeting time at my place. The buyer seemed eager and serious about the purchase, and I prepared the figurine, still pristine in its box. About 30 minutes after I shared my address, a figure appeared outside my door. The man was in his mid-20s, sporting an anime-themed shirt that featured a rather unsettling image. An anime girl with her eyes rolled back and then her tongue out, an expression that seemed more fitting for a horror film than an animated series. I know most of you anime fans out there know what shirt I'm talking about. I'm not saying you like it or enjoy it, but it's something that you've probably already seen. He knocked on my door and I greeted him, presenting the figurine for his inspection. As he leaned in to examine it, he referred to the figure as Barbara Chan, and his voice laced with an unsettling adoration for the figure. The casual nature of my transactions suddenly felt like there was an odd intensity to it. When I stated the asking price of $40, the price that I clearly listed in the ad that I posted, the buyer winced. He then suggested $10, which was an offer that was not only unrealistic but borderline insulting given the figure's value and condition. I chuckled awkwardly, declining his offer. I explained that the price was non-negotiable. I emphasized that it was clearly stated in the ad. But the buyer's demeanor shifted from eager to frustrated as he insisted that it was all the money he had and that he needed her. There was an uncomfortable tension between us as I reiterated the set price, asserting that it was his responsibility to check the ad details before coming over to my place. Well, that's when his frustration twisted into something darker. He warned me that making him angry was a bad idea, mentioning something about his skills in a way that seemed both vague and menacing. But to be honest, at that time, I wanted to laugh because it just seemed so cringy when he said it. I just asked him to leave, hoping that that would be the end of the interaction. Instead, he reached into his pocket and then he pulled out a knife. The sight of the blade so close to my face sent adrenaline coursing through my body, and my mind was scrambling for what to do next. With a disturbing calmness, he declared that he would be taking Barbara Chan with him. I was just stunned and cornered. I watched helplessly as he grabbed the figurine and then walked out of my house. And there was a mix of triumph and madness in his expression. The door then closed behind him, leaving me in a whirlwind of disbelief. It took a moment for reality to settle in, and when it did, I immediately called the police. I then provided them with the buyer's description, what he was wearing, what he was carrying, and also his phone number. And in a short time, the authorities tracked him down, since he was actually just walking a couple of blocks away from my house, and they arrested him, and I recovered the figurine safely. Though the figurine was returned to me, the experience tainted it. It no longer held the charm it once did. Instead, it reminded me of that crazy guy that I just encountered. So, I decided to relist it on Craigslist for $10, hoping to part with it quickly and just put the incident behind me. So yeah, I'm still dealing with some figurines on Craigslist, but I can say that I am more careful now. To anyone who sells or buys stuff from that site, just be careful, okay? I have always been the kind of person who believes in making smart financial decisions, especially when it comes to big commitments like housing. So, when I found a Craigslist ad for an apartment in the heart of the city at an unbelievably low price, it felt like finding gold. I wish that I had realized sooner that it was fool's gold. The listing caught my eye immediately. An apartment in a historic neighborhood, charming details like hardwood floors and exposed brick, all for less than half of what similar places were going for. It was almost too good to be true. I was living in a shared space at that time, and the allure of having a place to myself was irresistible. The photo gallery was stunning. Each image looked like it was pulled from a magazine. Sun-drenched rooms, a quaint little balcony with a view of the city skyline, and a kitchen that seemed both functional and stylish. The contact information was straightforward too, and I quickly sent an email expressing my interest. The response was prompt and friendly, and the landlord, who introduced himself as Tom, seemed eager to meet and show the apartment. Tom suggested meeting the very next day for a tour, so I cleared my schedule and I was excited at the prospect of moving into this dream space. I arrived early, taking in the surroundings of what could possibly be my new home. The building was old, but it was very well maintained, a testament to the neighborhood's charm. The streets were lined with trees that cast a welcoming shade, and the buzz of the city life felt miles away, replaced by a quieter hum. Tom showed up slightly late, a fact I initially chalked up to the unpredictability of city traffic. He was a middle-aged man, slightly disheveled, with an easygoing demeanor that put me at ease. He had the keys in his hand and then he ushered me inside. He was making small talk about the history of the building and how he had been managing the property for years. As I stepped into the apartment, it was even more beautiful than the pictures. The light streamed in just right, highlighting the details that made the space feel both elegant and cozy. I wandered from room to room, mentally placing my furniture, just imagining the life that I would create here, and it felt perfect. However, as I moved through the apartment, I started noticing little things that seemed off. In the living room, As I had examined the fireplace, I noticed a faint outline of what looked like a small, recently patched hole in the wall. It was directly across from where a couch might go. And in the bedroom, I found a similar patch near the ceiling. They were the exact same size and shape that one might associate with a hidden camera. So, I started to feel a little bit uneasy. But I just brushed off the feeling. I was attributing it to paranoia. After all, older buildings often had repairs and renovations. But as I continued my inspection, I felt Tom's presence more acutely behind me. He didn't hover over me exactly, but his proximity was noticeable, almost as if he was guiding me subtly away from certain areas. I just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched even when I was alone in a room with him waiting by the door. I attributed this to his eagerness to make the sale, perhaps noting that he really wanted me to take this place. This, I tried to convince myself, was just an enthusiastic salesman at work. And as we neared the end of the tour, Tom brought up the paperwork, mentioning that it could be drawn up quickly if I were interested. He seemed almost insistent that I didn't need to think about it or confer with anyone else. It struck me as odd, his urgency, you know? Most landlords want to run a credit check, or at least meet potential tenants more than once before handing over the keys. The more Tom pushed me, the more alarm bells started ringing in my mind. I told him that I needed a couple of days to think it over. He seemed disappointed, but masked it with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He just handed me a card with his contact information again, telling me to call as soon as possible, and I made my decision. When I left the apartment, the air outside felt refreshing, as if I hadn't fully realized that I had been holding my breath. I walked away, and the excitement of finding a great deal dampened by a sense of unease that I just couldn't fully explain. That evening, I just couldn't get the apartment out of my mind. Logically, it was a fantastic find, but something about the experience left me unsettled. Out of curiosity and a growing sense of needing reassurance, I researched the address and the landlord's name. I found little about Tom online, apart from generic listings associated with other properties. The building itself had no notable reputation, either good or bad. The next day, I decided to do a bit more digging. I was focusing on hidden cameras and surveillance, and I discovered that the patch marks that I'd seen could very well have been for concealed devices. There were numerous stories of landlords and even prior tenants just installing such things to observe those living in or visiting the apartment. That idea chilled me. I was flooded with relief that I hadn't signed anything or given any personal information beyond my initial email. As tempting as the apartment had been, I just couldn't shake the persistent feeling that taking it would mean forfeiting my privacy and possibly my safety. I emailed Tom to thank him for the tour, but I declined the offer. His response was immediate and unusually gracious, almost like he expected my decision and that he didn't mind it. It was as if the facade of his eagerness had dropped, revealing an indifference that further confirmed that I made the right choice. In the following weeks, I kept tabs on the listing out of sheer curiosity. The ad remained up, unchanged, and the photos just as enticing. But something in my gut just told me that beneath the surface, something was very wrong. I never found out if my suspicions were correct though. Perhaps it was all in my head, or perhaps I narrowly avoided becoming part of a story worse than I imagined. All I know is that sometimes, when something seems too good to be true, it often is. For anyone out there apartment hunting, Trust your instincts. If something feels off, there's probably a reason for it. It is better to walk away and find another opportunity than to discover too late that your privacy has been invaded. Everyone, stay safe and trust your gut, because sometimes that inner voice knows more than you do. I was selling my old golfing equipment. It was a necessity rather than a choice. With a second child on the way, our household needed both space and extra funds. Golf was once my beloved weekend retreat, but I had to take a back seat to the realities of family life. So, I posted an ad on Craigslist offering my cherished clubs and gear at a fair price, hoping that they would find a new home quickly. And it didn't take too long for a buyer to come forward. By midday, I had sold the equipment to a local enthusiast who seemed really thrilled to dive into the sport. And watching him drive away with my gear in his trunk, I felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. I would definitely miss my cherished clubs, but I was comforted by the thought that they would be used well. A few hours later, my phone rang. I was expecting a call from someone I know, but I was met with an unfamiliar voice asking about the golfing equipment. I explained that it had already been sold, and I mentioned forgetting about taking the ad down. I assumed that that would be the end of it. But instead, the caller inquired about future availability, as if I were a regular supplier or something. I clarified that I wasn't in the business of selling golf equipment, that this was a one-time sale of my personal belongings. However, the caller persisted, offering to pay more, and his urgency increasing with each exchange. I explained again that there was nothing left to sell. His insistence escalated to agitation, and feeling cornered, I just ended the call. I hoped that that would be the last that I would hear from him. I mean, that's weird, right? He was told that it wasn't available anymore. He could just go online and Google it, and he would find so many other sellers. Minutes later, the same number flashed on my screen again. This time, the caller's tone had shifted to frustration. He was berating me for not making the equipment available. His demands intensified, each word laced with aggression and entitlement. I hung up again because I did not have the patience to deal with this maniac. I tried to calm down as I thought that that would definitely be the end of this encounter. But then, a text message arrived. The crazy guy who just called me was ominously stating that they are to visit in a few minutes to inspect the gear. My frustration was spilling over. I replied, making it clear that there was nothing to inspect, and I was urging him to stop contacting me. My brain was whirling. I couldn't comprehend why this guy could not understand that I do not have the clubs anymore. A couple minutes, maybe around 10, go by, and a sleek sports car soon pulled into my driveway. My heart quickened as I stepped outside. I felt uneasy about confronting the stranger who clearly disregarded my boundaries and could not understand that the item was no longer available. A man emerged from the car. He was dressed up, exuding an aura of corporate power, not that I care though. I was just annoyed at this point. He approached me with a confidence that belied the absurdity of the situation, and he was demanding the equipment that I no longer had. I tried to explain the situation again to him, but it just would not go through his thick skull. Our exchange escalated. His disbelief and anger was palpable. Each attempt I made to explain only fueled it, as if accepting reality was beyond his comprehension. I tried to suggest to him to just go online or buy from someone else, but he says that he wanted the clubs now. The encounter then was interrupted by my wife stepping outside. She was holding her phone up, capturing the confrontation just in case we might need it later, for protective measure. But then the man directed his frustration towards her. His words were vile and hostile, and the encounter turned uglier. I was done with him, so I told him that I am calling the cops. That probably got him, because he gave me a final glare, and then he retreated to his car, leaving a wake of dust and tension behind. I just stood there, absorbing the surreal encounter and the audacity of someone who believed that bullying me could secure his missed purchase. Some people are just mental. I was in a transitional phase when I stumbled upon the job listing. My name is Edward, and I'm 27, and I found myself in a jumble of half-started careers and unfinished goals. The job market was relentless, and after months of sending resumes into oblivion, my savings were dwindling. It was during one of many late-night searches that I found the ad from a promising position in a growing tech company. It showed that the pay was decent and the role screamed potential for growth, everything that I was looking for to pull myself out of the rut. The ad that I found was on Craigslist, which wasn't unusual for startups. It mentioned the need for someone with diverse skills, someone that could think outside the box. The requirements seemed tailored to my eclectic work history, and the company boasted a casual, exciting environment. It seemed perfect. Well, almost too perfect. The application process was easy. Send a resume and a cover letter, and then wait for further instructions. So, I fired off my documents, and my heart was pounding with both hope and desperation. When I checked my email the next day, I saw that a reply landed in my inbox. It was inviting me to an interview the following day. The email was brief but polite, signed by someone named Joshua, who was apparently the hiring manager. He attached an address and a time, encouraging me to bring any documentation that I felt would bolster my application. The address was a nondescript office building in a part of town that is undergoing a slow and painful gentrification process. The kind of place where chic coffee shops popped up next to rundown buildings and also construction sites. I wasn't really familiar with the area, but a quick search showed that it wasn't far from downtown and that it was nestled amidst a maze of small businesses. I arrived early as I always did for interviews. I prefer to have a moment to collect myself. When I got there, I could see that the building was older, with a facade that had seen better days. It was sandwiched between a boutique furniture store and a vegan cafe. Because of its location, it actually seemed like it was a legit place. So, I walked up the steps, noting the absence of a company plaque or any indication of its occupancy, except for a faded "For Lease" sign, partially obscured by grime. Inside, the air was musty, a mixture of old carpeting and neglected ventilation. The lobby was small, furnished with a couple of worn chairs and a table littered with outdated magazines. I followed the instructions from Mark's email, which led me to the second floor and down a narrow corridor lined with frosted glass office doors. I found the door number listed in the email, but it was simply labeled 203 with no company name. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, but I shook off the unease. Maybe they were still settling in, I rationalized. New companies often started small and then expanded as they found their footing. But inside the room was bare, save for a desk and two chairs. There were no computers, no phones, and no welcoming potted plants or motivational posters. It was stark and impersonal, the kind of room that you would expect in an interrogation scene from a crime drama. I remember thinking that it was very strange, but my thoughts were interrupted by a man entering the room. He was middle-aged, with a thin frame and an air of hurried efficiency. He introduced himself as Joshua. He offered a firm handshake and then gestured for me to sit. His demeanor was polite but brisk, as though he had 1,000 things demanding his attention. He began to talk, his words a rapid-fire series of questions about my experience and skills. I answered as best as I could, trying to gauge his reactions. But there was a detachment in his eyes and almost mechanical process to his inquiry. It felt less like an interview and more like a formality that he was eager to complete. But then it shifted. His questions started to become more personal, straying from the professional path and meandering into areas that made me really feel uncomfortable. He asked about my family, my living situation, whether I lived alone, and red flags began to wave furiously in my mind, but I just tried to dismiss them as merely non-traditional interview techniques. Then, almost abruptly, the interview ended. Joshua stood, thanked me for coming, and said that they would be in touch. It was the suddenness of it all that left me reeling, as though he had decided within the first few minutes, and then the rest had been a mere charade. I left the building with a sense of disquiet that clung to me. The street outside was bustling, yet I felt isolated, a lone figure shuffling through the crowd, and I decided to walk to clear my mind, processing the odd interaction. And later that evening, an email came. It was a short, polite rejection, citing that while my qualifications were impressive, that they had decided to pursue other candidates. There was both relief and confusion in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off, and I was grateful, strangely, that I wouldn't be returning to that sterile little room. Days passed, and I resumed my job search. But I'm not even kidding you. That experience lingered in my mind. I mentioned it to a friend in passing during a phone call, more as an anecdote than a concern. But her reaction startled me. She urged me to report it, insisting that the scenario seemed suspicious and potentially dangerous. Her insistence roused my suspicions further, and I decided to look into the company, searching online for any mention or evidence of its existence. Nothing came up. No website, no testimonials, no digital footprint. Something almost unheard of for a tech company in this digital age. So I went to Craigslist again to search for the ad, and it was no longer there. It was gnawing at me. I decided to take another look at the building. So I returned, this time under the guise of a potential tenant inquiring about the space for lease. I wanted to see if there was any legitimacy to the company that I've been to, or if it had simply slipped through the cracks of my research. When I got there, a property manager met me at the entrance. She was a brisk woman in her 50s, with an air of professionalism around her. I asked her about the second floor, specifically the suite that I had just visited a week prior. She informed me that that space was empty and had been for some time now, and that they were actively seeking tenants. I mentioned the supposed company, explaining that I had visited for an interview. Her brow furrowed in confusion, and she confirmed that no company had rented the space, at least not officially. It was a chilling revelation. Whoever Joshua was, he had no legitimate ties to that building or any company within it. The realization that I had been lured to an empty office under false pretenses sent a shiver down my spine. The questions he asked, the strange setup, all took on a more sinister significance. I reported the incident to the local authorities. I provided them with the email correspondences and also the details of my visit. They assured me that they will look into it, but I left that station with a sense of lingering unease, wondering how many others might have been similarly deceived. The entire experience was a sobering reminder of the risk tied up while searching for jobs online. I was just fortunate that my encounter ended without harm, but the thought of what could have happened under different circumstances still haunts me. Hi, I'm a 24-year-old female, and I don't want to share my real name, so I'll call myself Rose for the story. I want to share a chilling encounter that happened when I decided to sell some old furniture online. It started as a simple Craigslist post for a vintage bookshelf. This was something that I inherited from my grandmother, and while it held sentimental value, I simply didn't have space for it in my small apartment. It was in excellent condition. It was beautifully carved with intricate details that spanned all 8 shelves. I listed it at a fair price, hoping that it would find a new home with someone who appreciated its craftsmanship. Within a day of posting, I received some inquiries. One potential buyer caught my attention. His name is Thomas. He was asking about the wood type and then mentioned that he was a collector of vintage furniture. So knowing this somewhat reassured me, and so I agreed to meet him at my apartment for him to check it out, and if we agreed, for him to also pick it up. On the day of the meeting, I made sure the bookshelf was ready to be moved. I cleared out all the few items that I had been storing on it. My apartment building wasn't large. It was just a modest 3-story walk-up with a small lobby. So, I figured getting the bookshelf down the stairs wouldn't be too much trouble. Thomas arrived punctually. He looked like he was in his late 40s, early 50s, and he had a friendly demeanor. He seemed harmless, really. He was dressed in casual jeans, a t-shirt, and then he extended a warm handshake and I greeted him. We exchanged some pleasantries, had small talk, and then I led him into the living room where the bookshelf stood. His eyes lit up when he saw it. He immediately began inspecting the craftsmanship, mumbling about the details, and I felt a sense of relief that this was going to be someone who would value it as much as my grandmother had. He was in love with it. After confirming the purchase, we then faced the challenge of moving it. Thomas suggested that he would dismantle part of it to make transportation easier. He was assuring me that he had the tools in his truck. It seemed logical enough to me, so I agreed. As he went to retrieve his tools, I realized that I hadn't asked him how he planned to transport the bookshelf. I hoped that he had a large enough vehicle, considering its size. When Thomas returned, he started working meticulously, removing the shelves with care. He was chatty, talking about his collecting hobby and some of the other pieces that he owned. I listened with half an ear, mostly focused on helping him however I could. Once the bookshelf was ready, we then began the awkward task of maneuvering it through the narrow hallway. It wasn't easy, and there were several times that we had to pause to adjust our grip and angle. During one of these pauses, Thomas started asking more personal questions. He asked about my work, if I lived alone, how long I've stayed in the apartment, and at first the questions seemed like small talk, but as they continued, they grew increasingly intrusive. We finally managed to get the bookshelf to the bottom of the stairs. It was a relief to have the most cumbersome part of the move over, and I imagined that Thomas would soon be on his way. However, as we reached the lobby, he paused, setting the bookshelf upright and taking a step back as if to admire it again. And then, he unexpectedly began talking about another piece of furniture that he had seen online, asking if I had others that I might be interested in selling. It was odd, the sudden shift of conversation. It really caught me off guard, and I just told him no, that this was the only piece that I had, hoping that that would signal an end to the conversation. But Thomas still lingered. He continued to talk about his collection and asking if he could look around to see if there is anything that caught his eye. This was the moment when the situation shifted from uncomfortable to alarming. I politely declined, emphasizing that I wasn't selling anything else and that I needed to go back to work. I then noticed that there was a slight shift in Thomas' friendly demeanor. He then nodded and agreed and suggested that we move the bookshelf to his truck. I just agreed. I was eager to end this transaction. As we moved the bookshelf to his vehicle, which was parked conveniently close, he once asked again about my living situation. I deflected as best as I could, my responses becoming curt as my patience wore thin. Finally, the bookshelf was loaded and I expected him to leave. Instead, he still lingered, recounting stories of his collecting adventures, his words almost rambling. My instincts were screaming at me that I needed to end this encounter, so I just thanked him for the purchase and then I turned to leave. Thomas then called out, offering a too eager handshake. I just accepted it out of politeness, and then I walked back towards the entrance of my building, and I just felt his eyes following me. And once inside, I locked my door and I took a moment to steady myself. That evening, I received an email from Thomas. He thanked me for the bookshelf again, and then mentioned that he would love to come back if I ever decided to part with more furniture. His words, though it was a bit polite, carried a very unsettling familiarity. I just didn't respond, hoping to end any further communication. But over the next few days, more emails followed from him, each increasingly personal and invasive. Thomas asked about how I was, inquired about my work schedule, and even hinted at stopping by to see about how the apartment looked without the bookshelf. There were lots of other emails that I received from him. I didn't respond and I thought that that would deter him from sending more, but I guess I was wrong, so I just finally blocked him. I am grateful though that my story ends with only an uncomfortable memory. So Thomas, let's not meet again. As far as I can remember, art has been a part of my life. I was that kid who always carried a sketchbook, filling it with doodles and drawings of the people and places around me. It was my way of making sense of the world and expressing what words couldn't quite capture. Over the years, my skills grew, evolving from simple sketches to more complex paintings. And even as I grew up, with the responsibilities of adulthood pressing in, my passion for art stayed with me. But the life of an artist is not an easy one. The world doesn't always value creative pursuits, and making a living solely from art can be a tough road. So while my heart longed to paint all day, I chose a more stable career path and kept my art as a cherished hobby. It was something that I did on the side, a way to unwind and keep that piece of myself alive. But then, one day, life threw me a curveball. My house needed some serious renovations, the kind that couldn't be ignored. Plumbing issues had reared their ugly head, and the repairs were more expensive than I anticipated. My savings weren't enough to cover it all, and I found myself scrambling for a solution. That's when the idea struck me. Why not try to sell some of my paintings? I had quite a collection by now, pieces that I was proud of. Maybe someone out there would see their value and it could help fund the repairs. It seemed like a win-win situation. So, I decided to give it a shot, listing a few of my paintings on Craigslist and Facebook Market with a hope and a prayer. To my surprise, it didn't take long before I received a response on Craigslist. A potential buyer reached out, expressing genuine interest in my work. Their messages were polite and to the point, praising the vibrancy and emotions in my paintings. It was also flattering, a small validation of my efforts. We emailed back and forth, discussing the details, and finally agreed to meet in person. The buyer suggested that we meet at a local park at around 9 in the evening. They explained that their work schedule was hectic and this was the only time that they could manage. It felt a bit odd, agreeing to meet so late, but desperation is a way of pushing you past your usual boundaries. I needed the money for the repairs and this seemed like my chance. So, I packed up 3 of the paintings carefully and I wrapped them securely and then I set off. In hindsight, leaving my phone at home was not my smartest move. I didn't want to risk it getting lost or stolen, but it also meant that I didn't have a way to call for help if needed. With just my bus pass and the paintings in tow, I headed to the park. The park was quiet when I arrived. The evening air cooled against my skin, and I found the spot that we had agreed on. It was a bench under a large oak tree, and I settled in to wait. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one adding to the tension in my chest. And then, I saw someone approaching from the distance, a shadowy figure silhouetted against the dim glow of the streetlights. Feeling a mix of excitement and relief, I stood up and waved at them. Well, that's when everything went dark. I felt a sharp pain exploded at the back of my head, and the world spun away into nothingness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. I was disoriented and with a throbbing headache that felt like a train had run through my skull. The fluorescent lights overhead were harsh, and it took me a moment to piece together what had happened. I had been attacked, and the painting stolen. I was left on the ground until a passerby noticed me and then called for help. It was a sobering moment, lying there amidst the sterile hospital sheets, realizing how close I had been to something far worse. The paintings, my precious artwork, were gone. And for what? I wasn't a famous artist at all, just someone trying to catch a break. It was baffling, the senselessness of it all. But despite the loss, I felt grateful that a kind stranger walking their dog had found me, grateful that I was now safe and on the mend. The paintings could be replaced, but my life was far more valuable. In the weeks that followed, the incident stayed with me. I shared my story with friends, urging caution to anyone considering even small transactions online. Craigslist, while a useful tool, has a darker side, one that I had unwittingly stumbled into. And yeah, don't worry, my parents felt bad hearing what happened to me, and they decided to gift me by covering the cost that I needed for my plumbing issues. And if you reached this far, thank you so much for reading. When Emily and I decided to get married, we knew that it wouldn't be easy. We were young, still finding our footing in the world, but we were in love and didn't want to wait. Our parents on both sides weren't thrilled. They were worried that we weren't ready, that we didn't have the financial stability needed to start the life together. And to be honest, they were kinda right. But we were determined. It was a challenge that we were willing to face together hand in hand. Our decision to marry meant moving out and finding a place of our own. The city wasn't cheap and our savings weren't impressive. With limited options and an eagerness to be together, we turned to Craigslist, hoping to find something affordable. After days of searching, we stumbled upon a listing that seemed perfect. It was a small rental, modest and cozy. Just a bedroom, some kitchen, a living room barely big enough for our second-hand sofa, and a bathroom that left much to be desired. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The ad promised a quiet neighborhood, utilities included, and a price that was within our reach. It felt like a beacon in a sea of unaffordable housing. The landlord seemed nice. He was a middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson. He was well-dressed and polite when we met him. He had a way of talking that made everything sound reassuring, and he was quick to respond to our emails and calls. We felt lucky to have found someone so accommodating and willing to work with our limited budget. So, of course, we moved in. At first, life in the apartment was blissful. We were newlyweds, soaking in every moment of our fresh start. The space, though small, felt intimate. We adorned the walls with photos from our little honeymoon, filled the shelves with knickknacks and gifts from our small wedding, and made plans for the future. But as the weeks rolled by, many things began to change. We would notice objects slightly out of place, a vase on the nightstand that neither of us remembered moving, a kitchen cabinet left ajar, and a window that was open when we both recalled closing it. At first, it was easy to shrug off, chalking it up to forgetfulness, or perhaps the quirks of living in an older building. But then, more unsettling things started happening. We'd return from work to find the bathroom light on, though we were 100% certain that we had left it off. Once, Emily swore that she heard footsteps in the living room while she was in the shower, only for us to find nothing amiss when I came home. It was as if the apartment had a life of its own, and it left us both uneasy. Well, the final straw came one night, late enough that the city outside had hushed to a whisper. I woke to an odd sensation, a chill creeping up my spine as if something was wrong. I turned, and there he was. Mr. Henderson, standing at the foot of our bed. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast shadows across his face, and his eyes held a look that I couldn't quite place. Something between curiosity and something more sinister. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and I didn't think, I just reacted. I leapt out of the bed, fist connecting with his jaw in a blur of motion. He staggered back, surprise etched across his features, before he turned and fled, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had appeared. Of course, with all of that happening, it woke up my wife. In the aftermath, Emily and I sat in stunned silence, the reality of what happened sinking in. I don't know why, but we didn't call the police. Probably fear, shock, and the desire to leave it all behind guided our decision. Instead, we called Emily's aunt, someone who lived in the same city, explaining the bare essentials of our situation and asking if we could stay with her while we figured out our next steps. She agreed without hesitation, offering a safe haven when we needed it most. We just spent the rest of the night packing, with a sense of urgency driving us forward. Dawn broke as we finished, and we left the apartment without looking back. Our hearts were a bit heavy, but we were determined to move on from the nightmare. On the same day, we reported the listing on Craigslist, hoping to prevent anyone else from experiencing what we had. In the safety of Emily's aunt's home, we began the search for a new place, one that would offer the peace and security that we immensely craved. I have always been the type to dive headfirst into new hobbies. The latest one, Magic the Gathering. It started innocently enough. A friend introduced me to the game during a casual get-together. We played a few rounds, and I was hooked almost instantly. There was something captivating about the strategy involved, crafting decks, the thrill of drawing the right card at the right moment, and the vibrant artwork that adorned each piece. Not long after, I found myself spending evenings watching tutorials, just trying to learn the rules and figuring out the strategies behind building a competitive deck. I myself leaned towards a blue and green deck so I could summon a lot of creatures. The more I learned, the more I wanted to immerse myself in this new world. My current collection was small, just a starter and a few booster packs, but I had big plans to expand it. Always on the lookout for a good deal, I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find someone selling cards in bulk. And after a few days of browsing, I stumbled upon a listing that piqued my interest. The seller claimed to have a large collection, including some rare cards, and was offering them at a seemingly fair price. It sounded perfect, almost too good to be true, but my eagerness got the better of me. I shot off an email expressing my interest, and the seller responded promptly. They were inviting me to come check out the collection in person. We arranged to meet at his place, which was in a part of town that I wasn't entirely familiar with. But I was excited about the prospect of expanding my collection, so I didn't think twice about it. When I arrived, the seller greeted me warmly enough, though there was something about him that I couldn't quite place. He seemed eager, almost too eager, to show off the collection. Inside, the place was cluttered, but that wasn't entirely surprising. I'd heard of stories of card collectors having rooms filled with boxes and binders, so I just brushed it off. He led me to a room where piles of cards were stacked on a table. There were hundreds, maybe thousands. He talked about how valuable they were, pointing out certain cards and claiming they were rare. On first glance, it looked like a treasure trove for someone like me, looking to get deeper into the game. It wasn't until I picked up a stack and started going through them that I noticed something was off. At first, it was just a feeling, a nagging suspicion that something wasn't quite right. The cards looked legitimate, but as I flipped through them, a few stood out. The colors were slightly off, the textures felt different, and some of the text seemed blurry. And then, I found it. The one card that confirmed my suspicion. It was a card that I recognized, but it looked strange. On closer inspection, I realized why. It was a printout glued onto another card, a fake, and not a particularly convincing one at that. It was a blatant attempt to pass off a counterfeit as the real deal. Pointing it out to the seller was my mistake, though. I expected an apology or at least an acknowledgement, but his reaction was far from that. Anger. Anger just flared in his eyes, and his demeanor shifted from eager to aggressive in just an instant. He began to yell at me, saying that I was just trying to scam him out of the quality cards. He grabbed me by my shirt and started yelling directly into my face. Standing there, I felt the growing sense of fear and panic set in. The room seemed to close in around me, and I was very aware of how alone I was. His anger was unsettling, bordering on irrational, and I realized that I needed to get out of there before things escalated further. To calm the situation, I tried to act as though it didn't bother me, choosing a few cards that I was certain were real. Part of me felt like I was giving in, like letting him win, but my safety was more important than a handful of cards. I paid what he asked, even though I knew I was being overcharged. Leaving his place, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief to be out and away from his anger, but also frustration and disappointment at the entire encounter. I drove home, my mind replaying the scene, trying to make sense of what had happened. I felt cheated, not just financially, but in my trust that people still dealt fairly. And once I was home, I spread the cards out on the table, examining them under better light. The ones I picked seemed legitimate, but the whole experience left a bitter taste. The excitement of building my own collection was dampened by the knowledge that not everyone in the community was honest. I know it was naive of me to think of that. But despite it all, I wasn't ready to give up on my newfound hobby. But I learned a valuable lesson about the risk involved when you are buying from strangers and the importance of trusting your instincts. I vowed to be more careful in the future, sticking to reputable sources and meeting in public places when possible. The world of trading cards was still one that I wanted to explore, but with a newfound caution, of course. And so, my story with trading cards continued, and not without its bumps though, but richer for the experiences and the community that welcomed me. In the end, I realized that while the game itself was captivating, it was the people that I met and the stories we shared that truly made it worthwhile. So, to everyone, stay safe out there. You never know who you meet on Craigslist. I am not one to let clutter pile up for too long, but over the years, my spare room had become a catch-all for all sorts of things: old furniture, boxes of clothes, and bits and bobs that just didn't have a place. So, after finally tying the knot with my husband, it felt like the right time to clear it out and reclaim the space. I had plans for it, a home office, maybe even a little reading nook. After sorting through everything that I had, I realized that some of the items were in good shape, just no longer needed. A decent sofa, a couple of shelves, even a small coffee table. They had been with me for years, and they have done their job, but now it was the time to let them go. Instead of trying to sell them, I decided to give them away for free. Someone else could get use out of them, and it would save me the trouble of hauling them to the donation center. So, Craigslist came to my mind as the quickest way to get the word out. I took some pictures, wrote up a brief description for each item, and then I posted the ad. It didn't take long before responses started coming in. People were eager for free furniture, and I get that. And within a day, I had several emails asking if the items were still available. Among the replies was a polite message from a man named Todd. He seemed genuine and appreciative, mentioning that he was furnishing a new apartment on a tight budget. It felt good to help someone who needed it, so I arranged for him to come by the next day. The plan was simple. He would swing by in the afternoon to pick up the sofa and the shelves. I was looking forward to seeing the space clear out, really. So the next day, Tom, a young man with short black hair and glasses, arrived right on time. He was friendly and grateful, just as the emails had suggested. We chatted a bit as he loaded the furniture in his truck. He even complimented the house, saying that it had a welcoming feeling. It was a nice exchange, and I felt content knowing that the items were going to someone who appreciated them. And with the furniture gone, the room felt spacious again. Inspired, I spent the next few days rearranging things, getting rid of more clutter, and I was envisioning how I would transform the space. It was so refreshing to see the room take shape, becoming something new. A week passed, and I'd nearly forgotten about the Craigslist exchange. Until I noticed something strange one evening. I was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner, when I glanced out the window and I saw a car parked on the road near my driveway. It was late, and the street was usually quiet at this hour. The car didn't belong to any of my neighbors. I would know. I've been living in that area for such a long time now, and I know everyone. And that car didn't move for a long time. It was just sitting there with its engine off and lights out. I watched for a while, wondering if maybe someone was lost or waiting for a friend. Eventually, the car started up and then drove away, leaving me with an uneasy feeling that I couldn't quite shake. The next few days, I noticed the car more frequently. It showed up at odd times, early in the morning, late at night, always parked in different spots, but close enough that I couldn't ignore it. Each time, my curiosity and my concern grew. I started to suspect that it wasn't just a coincidence, but I couldn't be sure. So, caution be damned, one day when the car was parked outside my house again, I opened my door quickly and I approached the vehicle. And as I did, the car lights immediately turned on and the engine started. The person was trying to pull off before I could get there, but before they sped off, I got a glimpse of the driver. A young man with short black hair and glasses. He looked so familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it at that time. One evening, after returning from a day out with friends, I found something that heightened my suspicion. As I approached my front door, I noticed the welcome mat was slightly askew. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper, and it was a simple note, unsigned, thanking me again for the furniture. It took only a few moments for me to finally connect the dots. It was Tom, the guy I gave the couch to from Craigslist. While I'm sure that it was a kind gesture for helping him, it instead felt very invasive. How long had the note been there? Why leave it now after all this time? The questions churned in my mind, and I knew that I couldn't ignore the gut feeling that something was off. I started paying more attention to my surroundings, making note of any unusual activity. The car kept appearing, though its pattern was erratic. Each time it lingered just long enough to unsettle me before vanishing. Deciding that enough was enough, I mentioned the situation to my friend Jake. He had a calm and practical approach to things, and I hoped that he could offer some advice. Jake suggested installing a security camera, pointing out that it would give me some peace of mind and see what other things Tom might be trying to do. And taking his advice, I set up a discreet camera facing the street. It felt a little paranoid, but after everything, I needed to feel secure in my own home. And after a few nights, the camera footage showed the car again, parked just down the road. But this time, it caught something more. A figure stepping out and standing just beyond the reach of the streetlight, watching the house. It was a chilling confirmation of my suspicions. It was indeed Tom keeping tabs on my house. I reported my findings to the police, armed with the footage that I had. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, reassuring me that they would keep an eye on things. They also told me that they would be speaking to Tom. As for anything more than that, they won't be able to do anything since he hasn't really done anything illegal or threatening. I'm pretty sure that the presence of the police Or maybe they did talk to him, because Tom and the car definitely stopped showing up, and my neighborhood and my life returned to its usual quiet. But this experience left me more cautious, more aware of the importance of privacy and safety, even in the simple acts like giving away furniture. And if you ask me where my husband was during this time, he was away on a business trip. Of course, I told him all about the ordeal. I just didn't think it was necessary for me to include him in the story, since he really wasn't at home at that time. So to those who are interested in buying, selling, or giving things away for free on Craigslist, make sure to meet up in a public space and never let them come to your house. My name is Joshua and I'm 27. Life has been a bit of a roller coaster, and not the kind that you enjoy. Things took a turn when my roommate, Ravi, had to suddenly move back to his country to take care of his grandfather. It was unexpected, and while I totally understood his decision, it left me in a bit of a bind. Covering the rent on my own wasn't an option, so finding a new roommate became urgent. I decided to post an ad on Craigslist. It seemed like the quickest way to find someone given the circumstances, and I got a ton of responses, more than I expected really. Everything from students looking for their first place to some older folks wanting to downsize. And as I sifted through the emails, one stood out to me. His name was Vincent. He was around my age, and he mentioned that he was starting a new job in the area and needed a place quickly. And it actually seemed promising. We exchanged a few emails, and Vincent came over to check out the apartment. He was easy to talk to, seemed responsible enough, and we hit it off pretty well. We chatted for a bit about our interest and what we were looking for a roommate situation. And after a few more back and forths, we came to an agreement and Vincent moved in a week later. Initially, it felt like I lucked out. Vincent was a cool guy. We bonded easily over shared interest. We would have meals together, cook up some quick pasta dishes, or order takeout when we were lazy. We would often play video games in the living room, getting a bit too competitive sometimes, but it was all in good fun. And occasionally, we would hit the bars, trying out new spots and unwinding after work. It was good having someone around who was on the same wavelength as me. But after a few weeks, things started to shift. Vincent began to change, and not in a subtle way. He became more reserved, barely coming out of his room, and he looked thinner, tired, and there were times that I would catch him zoning out, lost in his own world. It was like he was carrying some weight that was pulling him down, and he didn't want to share it with anyone. I didn't press him much at first. I figured that everyone has their ups and downs. But then things got stranger. One night, while I was lounging on the couch watching some late-night TV, there was a knock at the door. It was odd since we weren't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man that I didn't recognize, and he looked, well, sketchy. His eyes were darting around, and he had this anxious energy about him. So I didn't open the door, and I just asked through it who he was. He said that he was looking for Vincent, and that Vincent owes him something. That set off alarm bells in my head. I told him that I would check if Vincent was home, and I walked down the long hallway to knock on Vincent's door. It took a few tries, but eventually he opened up. The sight that greeted me was unsettling. His room was a mess, clothes strewn everywhere, and the air was heavy with a sour, unclean smell. Vincent himself looked worse than before, pale and jittery. But what caught my eye was on his table. Powder in a straight line. Well, it didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. I told Vincent that someone was looking for him, and he immediately went pale, a look of fear spreading across his face, and he begged me to tell the guy that he wasn't there, panic lacing his voice. I didn't want to get involved, but I agreed to help him out this one time. However, I made it clear that I couldn't have this kind of trouble in my life and in my home, that he had to find somewhere else to go. Vincent nodded, his eyes filled with something like regret, and I went back to the door and told the man that I had knocked and called out multiple times, but it seemed that Vincent wasn't home. The man lingered for a moment, then left, leaving with a pit in my stomach. 2 days later, Vincent packed his things and then moved out. It was a quiet departure, no drama, just an understanding that it was for the best for everyone. I do hope that he'd get his life together. I did find a new roommate soon after, and it's been a couple of months now and everything seems normal. We've settled into a routine that feels safe, like a calm after a storm. Sometimes, I think about Vincent, wondering where he ended up, if he managed to turn things around. Life in the city moves fast and people come and go. I just hope that he found the help that he so needed. When I was a kid, all I wanted to have was an Xbox. You know, the kind everyone was talking about at school. My friends had one, and they would spend hours playing games together, trading stories of their virtual adventures. I would listen, eager to join in, but the truth was, those consoles weren't cheap, and my family couldn't just buy one on a whim. I understood, but it didn't make the longing any easier. I had been saving up for a long time now, hoarding my birthday money, Christmas gifts, and whatever I got from my grandparents. And slowly, my savings grew. But it's still not enough to buy that coveted Xbox at full price. It was frustrating me, seeing it so close yet so out of reach. That's when my dad suggested that I look into getting a used one. He said that they would be cheaper, and it made sense to me. I just wanted to play. With that in mind, I started browsing Craigslist. It wasn't easy. Most listings were either too expensive or too far away. I sent out messages hoping someone would be open to negotiating, but the replies were mostly firm in price. I felt like I was hitting dead ends, and my small savings didn't seem to hold much weight in the adult world of buying and selling. But then one day, I came across an ad that caught my eye. An Xbox One for only $20 above what I had. It was in my city too, which was a stroke of luck. I messaged the seller, explaining my situation, and to my surprise, he agreed to sell it to me at the price that I could afford. I was thrilled, and I immediately ran to tell my dad. He was supportive, as always, and he agreed to drive me to the seller's place to pick it up. The thought of finally having the Xbox in my grasp was almost too much to handle, and I was buzzing with excitement the whole way there. When we arrived, the seller greeted us at the door. He seemed a bit nervous but was friendly enough. He led us inside to where the Xbox was set up, and seeing it there, all shiny and real, was like a dream to me. He booted it up to show us that it was working fine, and everything seemed to be in order. I could hardly contain my excitement. And after checking it out, my dad and the seller talked numbers. That's when the seller mentioned that he had some games that he could throw in for just $20 more. He was sweating a bit more and looked nervous, but at that time, I didn't think much of it. I was about to say that I didn't have the money, but my dad stepped in, handing over the extra cash. They shook hands, and just like that, the Xbox was mine, games included. I carried the Xbox and games to the car like they were a treasure, and on the way home, I was already imagining all the fun that I would have, the games that I could play, and finally, be able to hang out with my friends online when they were playing. Back at home, I wasted no time setting it up in my room. I went through the games picking out the ones that looked interesting. It was everything that I had hoped for. But when I got to the case for Dragon Quest XI, something seemed off. The disc inside wasn't like the others. It was just a plain CD, not the usual video game disc. Curious, I popped it into the console, expecting maybe a hidden game or a bonus content. But what came up on the screen was a video instead, and what I saw made me freeze. It was a man doing something no kid should ever see. My heart pounded as I fumbled to turn off the console and I yanked the disc out. My hands shook as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what just happened. I checked the other cases and to my horror, I found 4 more nameless CDs just like it. I didn't know what to do. I felt sick to my stomach, a mix of fear and panic. I knew I should have told someone, but the thought of my dad taking away the Xbox, this thing that I'd wanted for so long, stopped me. And I couldn't bear the idea of losing it all after finally getting it. In a rush of impulse, I snapped the CDs in half, breaking them beyond repair, and I shoved the pieces into a bag, planning to toss them in the trash later. I tried to push down the fear and confusion, focusing instead on the games that were actually games, trying to reclaim the excitement that I had felt just hours before. Looking back at it now as an adult, I realized how wrong it all was. The seller, his nervousness, the way he'd pushed for the games on us, and most unsettling, the CDs. I can't help but think that he left them in there intentionally, that maybe he was someone who enjoyed the thought of a child seeing him do those things. It's a chilling thought, one that makes my skin crawl even now. At that time, I was just a kid, excited about a new game console, and I didn't fully understand the severity of what I'd found. But now, in hindsight, I see it all too clearly. In the end, I kept the Xbox. I played it for years, always careful about where I got my games from thereafter. And I learned a lesson, one that I will never forget, about caution and trust. And one thing I want to add, I never bought anything from Craigslist after that.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.